You're alone, aren't you? That's exactly why you're here. I'm the one who stays up when the house gets quiet, the one who watches the shadows move just a little too far. There are things that happen in the dark that logic can't touch, events that slip through the cracks of our understanding. Some say it's just the mind playing tricks, others say it's something else entirely. I don't know what to tell you. I only know that we need to talk about it. The night is long, and we have a lot to cover before morning. Let's get into the first one. I don't expect you to believe me. It was late October, and I had driven 3 hours off the main highway to find a campsite near the edge of Blackwood Ridge. The GPS cut out about 20 minutes before I found the clearing, which was perfect for what I wanted, but it also meant I had to rely on the faint glow of the setting sun to navigate the dense tree line. I set up my tent near a cluster of dead pines that looked like skeletal fingers reaching for the sky. The air was already freezing, crisp enough to make my breath visible, and the silence was so absolute it felt like the forest was holding its breath, waiting for something to break the stillness. I've always been an independent camper, someone who likes the solitude. For the first few hours, everything felt normal. I built a fire that crackled warmly against the encroaching darkness, roasted some marshmallows, and read by the light of my headlamp. But around 11 p.m., I noticed something strange about the woods. The crickets had stopped. Not gradually, like they usually do when the wind picks up, but instantly. 1 second I heard the rhythmic chirping, and the next, total silence. I told myself it was just a cold front moving in, that the temperature drop had silenced the insects. I checked the air temperature on my phone. It was dropping, but not fast enough to account for that sudden, unnatural quiet. I packed up my book and decided to go to bed early, keeping my flashlight within arm's reach on the log beside my tent. The night got worse in increments that made no logical sense. First, I heard a twig snap, sharp and loud, just outside the tree line. I shone my light around, but the beam cut through the darkness without finding anything. Then, the fire, which had been roaring steadily, died down. Not a slow fade, but an instant collapse, leaving me in near darkness with only the moonlight filtering through the trees. I tried to relight it, but the matches were damp, even though I'd kept them in a sealed bag. I sat there for an hour, staring into the embers, hearing a low humming sound that seemed to vibrate through the ground beneath my boots. I convinced myself it was the wind, or maybe a distant generator, but the sound was too rhythmic, like a heartbeat. I grabbed my sleeping bag and pulled it over my head, trying to sleep through the noise. When I woke up, the fire was gone, completely extinguished, and the tent zipper was open. The cold had seeped in, turning the air inside the tent to ice. I scrambled out, heart hammering, shining my light into the clearing. The campsite was untouched, no footprints, no drag marks. But there was a single, wet footprint pressed into the frozen mud right next to my tent. It wasn't a boot print or a shoe print, it was barefoot, but the toes were too long, too thin, with joints that seemed to bend backward at impossible angles. I backed up until my spine hit the tent pole, and that's when I saw them. The trees, the dead pines I'd set up next to, were moving. Not swaying in the wind, but sliding, inch by inch, closing in on my tent. The humming was louder now, a low thrumming that made my teeth ache, and I could smell something like wet copper and rot underneath the cold air. I didn't run, I just stood there, watching the branches creep closer, until the darkness swallowed the fire and the trees were right on top of me. I don't remember running, but somehow, I made it back to my car. The keys were in the ignition, the engine had turned over, but the tires were gone. Just flat, shredded rubber and metal rims grinding against the frozen dirt. I managed to push the car down the slope, dragging it until I hit the main road, and then I finally got a signal and called a tow truck. I never went back to the campsite. I drove straight to the nearest town, got a hotel room, and called my sister, but I couldn't say a word. A week later, I'm still in that hotel room, and I'm checking my shoes every time I take them off. They look fine on the outside, just normal sneakers. But when I look at the soles, they are wet. Not from rain, but from something sticky and dark, and no matter how much I scrub them, the smell of wet copper and rot never fades. I know I left my tent on that mountain, but I can still hear the humming when I close my eyes, and sometimes, in the quiet of the night, I hear a sound that sounds exactly like a twig snapping, right outside my hotel door. I've never told anyone this, but it happened 3 years ago in the underground parking garage of my apartment complex. It was about 2:15 a.m., the kind of hour where the silence feels heavy and the fluorescent lights hum with a headache-inducing buzz. I was walking back to my car, the third level, when I heard footsteps echoing behind me. Not the skitter of shoes on concrete, but the distinct, rhythmic thud of something heavy being dragged slowly across the floor. I've lived in that building for 5 years. It's a normal place. A concrete box with 2 exits, a dead drop, and a security office that's usually empty. I've walked these lanes 1,000 times. That Tuesday, I was just trying to get home, tired from a double shift. I remember checking my phone, but the screen was black, even though I had just plugged it in an hour ago. I looked up and saw the shadow cast by a pillar, but it didn't match the light source. It stretched out too long, pointing directly at me, though the overhead bulbs were spaced evenly all the way down the lane. I told myself it was just my eyes playing tricks, a trick of the dim lighting. I told myself it was the shadows of the parked cars. But the sound of that dragging continued, steady and unhurried, getting closer. I kept telling myself it was just a stray cat, or maybe a raccoon in a bag, but the rhythm was too human. It was too deliberate. I started walking faster, my heart hammering against my ribs, trying to convince myself I was just overthinking it. I told myself it was sleep deprivation, that I needed coffee. Then the dragging stopped. The silence was so sudden it felt like a slap. I froze, listening, and then I heard a voice. It was right next to my ear, whispering my name, but the voice wasn't coming from behind me anymore. It was coming from the car parked 2 spots to my left. A Honda Civic I didn't own, sitting there in the dark, the engine cold, the windows fogged from the inside out. I backed away, clutching my keys like a weapon, and that's when I saw the front seat. There was a figure sitting there, head bowed, wearing a dark coat that looked too big for the frame. I heard the driver's door click open. It creaked, a sound that echoed too loudly in the small space. I turned to run, but my feet wouldn't move. The figure stood up slowly, and I could see it wasn't a person. It was just a coat, stuffed to look like a human, with a head that was made of something else, something that wasn't flesh. It stepped out of the car, the coat billowing around it, and reached for me. I couldn't scream. The air seemed to have been sucked out of the lane, leaving me gasping in a vacuum. The thing didn't attack, it just stood there, its empty coat hanging off nothing, and then it walked right through me. The sensation was like being dipped in freezing water, a shock that went straight to my bones. I felt cold, so cold it burned, and for a second, I saw the world from the thing's perspective. I saw the security camera in the corner, the one that had been broken for months, and I saw myself standing there, looking perfectly fine, while the coat stood over me. It wasn't a ghost or a monster. It was just empty space where something had been, and then it was gone, leaving me shaking on the concrete, the engine of the Honda still silent, the windows still fogged. I ran to my car and locked every door. I drove home with my hands shaking so hard I could barely turn the key. I haven't slept well since that night. I checked the garage a few weeks later, just to be sure. The Honda Civic was gone, but the security footage from the broken camera showed a man in a dark coat standing next to the car for an hour, staring at the lens, before he just faded out. He didn't walk away. He just stopped being there. I don't know if someone was pulling a prank, or if I'm losing my mind, but the cold is still there. It's a part of me now. And sometimes, when I'm alone in my apartment, I can hear that same rhythmic thud in the hallway, getting closer, but the coat is always empty when I turn the corner. This happened to me during my 3rd week of night shifts at the St. Jude's ER in Cleveland. It was a Tuesday, roughly 3 a.m., when the rain was hammering against the glass so hard it felt like the building was being shaken apart. The place was nearly empty, just me and the orderly in room 4, with the hum of the HVAC system filling the sterile silence. I remember the fluorescent lights flickering in a way that made the shadows under the gurneys look like they were stretching toward me, just a fraction longer than the angle of the room would allow. I've worked nights for 5 years now, and I know the rhythm of a hospital in the dead hours. The smell of antiseptic and stale coffee, the rhythmic beep of monitors, the way the world outside fades into a gray blur. It's the kind of quiet that lets your mind wander, or maybe it just lets things wander in. I was charting vitals in the nurse's station, the only area fully lit, when I noticed the supply closet door was open. That's the detail I should have remembered better. The doors are always kept closed and locked for infection control, but this one was ajar, just enough to see the stacks of linens inside. I figured someone was just grabbing extra linens or maybe a broken cup. I told myself it was probably just tiredness making me paranoid, a common side effect of the 3rd week of the month. I walked over to it, intending to shut it and maybe check if the light inside was still on, but the air coming out of that closet felt different, like it was coming from a deep well rather than the hallway. The first time I checked the door, the light was on. The second time, it was off, but the hum of the room changed pitch, dropping an octave so low it vibrated in my teeth. I walked over to the closet again, thinking it was a sensor glitch, and the door was slightly wider than before. It wasn't being pushed, it was just slowly, imperceptibly swinging outward on its own, as if something inside had expanded. I told myself I'd lock it the moment I got a break, but then the hallway monitor on the wall, which was facing away from the closet, suddenly turned toward it without making a sound. The camera feed showed the closet, but in the screen, the space inside was full. Not of linens, not of supplies, but of a thick, dark fog that seemed to be pushing against the walls of the room from the inside. I laughed, a dry, nervous sound, and walked up to the door, reaching for the handle to close it, but my hand froze inches from the cold metal. The fog in the video seemed to press against the glass of the monitor, distorting the image, and for a second, I saw a hand on the inside, pressing against the door from the other side, fingers elongating as if they were trying to reach through the wood. I stood there, my heart hammering against my ribs, waiting for the monitor to reset, waiting for the fog to clear. Then the door actually moved. Not a creak or a slam, just a smooth, silent slide as it swung fully open. The light inside the closet was gone, replaced by a void that looked like a hole punched through reality. The air pressure in the room dropped instantly, popping my ears, and the smell of antiseptic vanished, replaced by something wet and earthy, like soil dug up after a heavy storm. I tried to back away, but my feet felt heavy, like I was wading through deep water. From the darkness of the closet, a voice came through, not from any direction, but right inside my head. It wasn't human, or at least not human in any way I could recognize. It was just a sound, like 1,000 voices whispering in unison, repeating the same phrase over and over. I couldn't make out the words, just the cadence, the rhythm of something that was trying to say, "Let me in," but couldn't quite form the letters. The thing inside didn't have a shape, just a shifting, undulating mass that seemed to absorb the light around it, growing larger with every second. I screamed, but no sound came out. The monitor on the wall went black, but I could still see the closet, and I could see the thing inside, and it was looking right at me. I don't remember running. I don't remember calling for help. I just remember waking up on the floor of the supply closet an hour later, my head spinning, the door closed and locked from the inside. The light was on, the linens were stacked just so, and the hallway was quiet. I went back to the nurse's station, checked the logs, and found nothing. No one had seen me go into the closet. No one had heard me scream. But the thing that stayed with me was the smell. For days after that night, I couldn't get the scent of wet earth and rot out of my clothes, even after multiple showers. If something like this has ever happened to you, I want to hear it. Drop your story in the comments. Sometimes knowing we aren't the only ones makes the silence a little less heavy. Next time, we're diving into reports that are even harder to explain than this one. Just stay subscribed if you can handle it. I'll be here, recording in the dark, waiting for you to come back. Until then, don't forget to lock your doors. Good night.